Welcome. Whether you are catching up on your music history for an upcoming trivia night, or, you are just insanely curious about the behind-the-scenes drama of absolute rock legends, you are in the exact right place.
You really are.
Today, we're going on a deep dive into a band that completely redefined the landscape of 1970s rock.
And we have a truly fascinating stack of sources to draw from for this one.
Oh, absolutely.
We are looking at comprehensive music history articles, the band's official timeline, their Wikipedia page, and this remarkably candid modern-day interview with one of the founding members.
Right, and don't forget the review of their memoir, Kicking and Dreaming. That one is incredible.
Yes, a fantastic, really in-depth review of that memoir.
So the mission for this deep dive is sort of twofold. First, we want to explore exactly how the rock band Heart shattered the incredibly, male-dominated music industry of the 1970s.
Which was no small feat.
Not at all. But beyond the industry politics, we are going to uncover how their intensely messy, just incredibly intertwined personal lives actually fueled some of the greatest rock anthems ever recorded.
And that dual focus is crucial for you to keep in mind. Looking at the sources, it becomes immediately clear that Heart wasn't just a standard band putting out hit records.
Right.
It functioned much more like a highly complex family business.
Yeah.
It was built on this foundation of immense, undeniable talent, but it was simultaneously built on an extraordinary amount of emotional turbulence.
A lot of truth.
You really cannot separate the interpersonal drama from the music they were creating.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start with the unique setup of the band in its early days, because the dynamic sounds like something straight out of a movie script.
It really does.
You have these two incredibly talented sisters, Anne and Nancy Wilson, who are fronting the group.
Right.
But then they are romantically intertwined with brothers within the band's inner circle.
Yeah, the romantic entanglements were the absolute core of their early identity.
It's wild.
Anne was involved with Mike Fisher, who stepped in to become the band's manager. And Nancy was with Roger Fisher, the band's lead guitarist.
Two sisters, two brothers.
Exactly. That intense, completely insular dynamic heavily dictated their early creative process.
And it seems like that pressure cooker environment directly led to some of their earliest massive hits.
Oh, without a doubt.
I was reading about the creation of Crazy on You, and the context behind it is just fascinating. It wasn't just a standard rock love song.
Far from it. The creation of Crazy on You was deeply rooted in the geopolitical tension of the era.
Right, the Vietnam War.
Exactly. Anne wrote those lyrics to express this overwhelming, suffocating anxiety she was feeling about the war. The song is basically a plea to just escape the madness of the world and find some kind of solace with Mike.
Because they were in Canada at the time, right?
Yes. The entire reason they were stationed in Vancouver in the first place, which is where they formed the core of what would become Heart, was because Mike had crossed the border into Canada specifically to evade the United States military draft.
That is just wild to think about. That massive, iconic song, which, still plays on every classic rock station today, was fundamentally born out of draft evasion and profound political anxiety.
It really puts a different spin on the lyrics when you listen to it now.
It really does. But the music itself on that track is just as intense as the backstory. For anyone listening who has ever tried to play a guitar with hellish high action, you know how punishing that is on your fingers.
Oh, it's brutal.
And our sources note that Nancy Wilson recorded that famous acoustic intro on a Guild Jumbo acoustic guitar that was notoriously difficult to play.
The physical demand of that specific instrument cannot be overstated. High action means the strings are hovering significantly far above the fretboard.
Right, so you have to press down super hard.
Exactly. Requiring massive grip strength just to press a single chord. And Nancy compounded that difficulty with her specific technique.
Because she didn't just use a regular pick.
No, she used the thumb pick, along with her bare fingers. And here's the craziest part. She was absolutely determined to record that entire, intricate, sweeping acoustic piece in a single, continuous take.
Wow.
She entirely rejected the idea of using punch-ins or letting the studio engineers splice different takes together.
Which means if she messed up the very final note,
She had to start all the way from the beginning.
that sounds like torture.
It was. She played that hellish Guild guitar over and over until she had raw, bleeding blisters all over her fingers.
Oh, man.
She described the sensation as feeling like her fingers were literally going to fall off her hand.
But she got the take.
She got the take. And that single anecdote perfectly illustrates the foundational duality of Heart. You have this bombastic, aggressive, electric hard rock seamlessly blended with this delicate yet physically punishing acoustic folk.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Because as talented and driven as they were women trying to navigate the 1970s rock scene.
Which was not a friendly place for women.
Not at all. The industry was notoriously brutal to them. I was reading this section about their label at the time, Mushroom Records, and this infamous publicity stunt they pulled. Can you walk us through what happened there?
Yeah, it represents one of the ugliest moments in their early career. The executives at Mushroom Records decided they needed a provocative angle to sell more albums.
As if the music wasn't enough.
Exactly. So without the band's consent, the label manufactured and released a completely fabricated story to the press. They actually ran full-page ads implying that Ann and Nancy Wilson were involved in an incestuous lesbian affair.
It's just so gross and exploitative.
Completely.
And according to the memoir review, this totally backfired on the label and led to an incredible breaking point for Ann. The sources detailed this moment after a concert in Detroit that just makes your blood boil.
The Detroit incident was the catalyst for everything that followed.
What happened exactly?
A male radio promoter approached Ann backstage after the show and casually asked how her lover was doing.
And Ann thought he meant Mike.
Right. Ann naturally assumed he was talking about her boyfriend, Mike Fisher. But the promoter then clarified, with a smirk, that he was referring to her sister, Nancy.
The absolute audacity to say that directly to her face is staggering.
It really is.
But I love how she reacted. Instead of just shutting down, she took that rage straight to the notebook.
She went directly back to her hotel room, completely consumed by justified anger. And she channeled every ounce of that fury into writing the original lyrics for Barracuda.
Such a great song.
The Barracuda in the song is a metaphor that represents everyone from that sleazy local radio promoter to the president of their record company. The direct, unapologetic indictment of the exploitative nature of the music business.
I have to geek out over the musical construction of Barracuda for a second because the riff is one of the most recognizable in rock history.
Oh, absolutely iconic.
But where did it actually come from? Because our sources indicate that Nancy didn't just pull that galloping rhythm out of thin air.
The origin of the riff is a great piece of rock trivia. Hart had been touring over in Europe, sharing bills with the rock band Nazareth.
Okay.
At the time, Nazareth had recently recorded a heavy cover of a Joni Mitchell song called This Flight Tonight.
Right.
Their version featured this very specific, driving, galloping guitar riff. Hart essentially lifted that rhythmic vibe and repurposed it for Barracuda.
And Nazareth noticed, right.
Oh, they definitely noticed. Apparently, when they crossed paths with the Nazareth guys later on, the guys were visibly furious about the borrowed inspiration.
It really makes you rethink how interconnected all these legendary bands were, just passing riffs back and forth.
What's fascinating here is how Nancy and the rest of the band elevated that borrowed rhythm into something entirely their own.
They didn't just copy it.
No, Nancy intentionally structured the song using very odd time signatures to keep the listener slightly off balance.
Right. It's not just straight 4/4 time.
Exactly. Instead of a standard, predictable rock beat, parts of Barracuda jump abruptly into 5/4 and 7/4 timing.
It skips a beat here, it rushes a beat there.
Nancy herself referred to it as a sophisticated song of rage.
It is an absolute masterpiece of musical tension. And interestingly, Barracuda had a massive, highly publicized second life decades later in the political sphere.
Yes, the 2008 election.
Exactly. During the 2008 presidential election, the John McCain and Sarah Palin campaign used the song at the Republican National Convention. They were directly referencing Palin's high school basketball nickname, which was Sarah Barracuda.
Right.
Now, as we dive into this, it is really important to note for you listening that we are simply conveying the historical facts of this event as outlined in our sources.
Yes, strictly the facts from the source material.
We are looking at the wildly different reactions from the band members without endorsing any political viewpoint whatsoever. We aren't taking any sides. It's just a fascinating look at how art takes on a life of its own once it's out in the world.
And the reaction within the Hart camp was completely fractured, which really highlights how differently co-creators can view their own work.
What were the two sides?
Well, the Wilson sisters strongly disapproved of the usage because they fundamentally disagreed with the campaign's policies. They took swift legal action and sent a formal cease and desist letter to the campaign.
Okay, pretty standard for a band that disagrees with the political usage.
Right. However, Roger Fisher, who co-wrote the song and played that iconic lead guitar part, had a completely different take. He publicly stated he was thrilled by the situation.
Which had to cause some awkward tension behind the scenes. Why was he so happy about it?
He went on a Seattle radio show and outlined two very pragmatic reasons. First, he was perfectly happy to collect the unexpected royalty checks that came from the massive national exposure.
Oh, that's honest.
Very honest. And second, he felt it gave him a huge public platform to express his own political views, specifically his support for Barack Obama.
Oh, interesting.
And to add another layer to it, the band's drummer at the time, Michael DeRosier, also publicly supported the Republican National Convention's use of the song.
It just shows you that once a song is released into the wild, it belongs to the culture. And the culture will use it however it sees fit, regardless of what the original writers intended.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of the band's trajectory, that constant external pressure from the industry, the media, the fans, eventually combined with their tangled personal lives to take a massive toll.
Because it wasn't sustainable.
No.
No.
Ann Wilson herself stated in the sources that the original lineup of the band was ultimately doomed by what she called emotional hardship.
Yeah.
The irony is that the fracture didn't happen when they were struggling in Vancouver. It happened once they stopped being destitute. When the immense wealth and global fame finally poured in, the foundation completely cracked.
And the specific details of that fracture really highlight the gender dynamics at play. And noted that the band literally started squabbling straight down gender lines.
Which makes sense given the setup.
Right. The male members of the band were feeling incredibly hurt and increasingly angry over the overwhelming amount of media attention that was constantly heaped on the Wilson sisters.
The jealousy was profound. The men felt relegated to the background, while Ann and Nancy became global superstars.
And they were the faces of the band.
Exactly. And this resentment was compounded by major lifestyle clashes on the road. Ann and Nancy deeply despised the typical 1970s rock groupie culture.
They weren't into the party scene in that way.
No, they hated the expectation that they had to cover for the guys and lie to the band members' wives back home about the infidelity happening on tour. It created a highly toxic, mistrustful environment.
And it all finally culminated on Halloween night in 1979. Roger Fisher's romance with Nancy had officially ended, and the tension was so thick that the rest of the band officially voted him out.
A massive turning point.
But what really surprised me in the sources is that in his modern-day interview, Roger doesn't sound bitter about getting fired. He actually has a very enlightened perspective on it.
He refers to his firing as a mercy decision.
Really?
Yes. He firmly believes that the lifestyle he was leading, combined with the toxic environment of the band at that specific time, was leading him down a very dark road. He stated that if he had stayed in Heart, the excess and the stress would have literally cost him his life.
So they survive the turbulent 70s, they navigate the massive glossy pop rock era of the 1980s, the 90s, the 2000s, but the underlying family drama that defined their early years never really went away.
It definitely followed them.
Fast forward 37 years to 2016, and the family business suffers its most severe rupture yet. What exactly happened on that tour?
The 2016 incident was a devastating blow. During a tour stop, Ann's husband, Dean Wetter, got into a severe physical altercation with Nancy's teenage sons.
Over what?
According to the reports, the boys had accidentally let Ann's dogs out of the tour bus. Wetter reacted with extreme, just completely disproportionate anger, assaulting the teenagers.
That's horrific.
He punched one of them and actually put his hands around the throat of the other. It escalated to the point where he later pled guilty to assault.
How do you even look at your sister, let alone step onto a stage and harmonize with her, after her husband does something like that to your children? The betrayal has to be unimaginable.
It required a level of extreme professional compartmentalization that is hard to fathom.
How did they even finish the tour?
The Washington Post detailed how they managed to salvage the remainder of that 2016 tour, and it was entirely clinical. They had to involve lawyers and create legally binding sanctuary zones backstage.
Sanctuary zones?
Yes, they literally wrote it into their contracts that they would maintain completely separate camps. They had separate dressing rooms on opposite sides of the arena, entirely separate makeup artists, separate management teams.
So they didn't even cross paths until they walked on stage.
Exactly. They were a family utterly divided, communicating only through intermediaries, just trying to keep the massive touring machine running so they wouldn't face catastrophic cancellation lawsuits.
That sounds like a miserable way to make music. But there is a silver lining to this specific chapter. Time seemingly heals, or at least softens, some wounds. By the time they announced their 2024 tour, the sisters had miraculously reconciled. They officially dropped those intense sanctuary zones from their contracts.
That must have been a huge relief.
And went on record stating they were unnecessary now, and Nancy agreed that operating with separate camps just didn't make sense anymore. They finally found their way back to each other.
Which is really beautiful after everything they went through.
So, what does this all mean? When we zoom out and look back at the massive scope of Hart's career, from the 1970s draft-dodging days to the 2024 reunion, what is their ultimate legacy in the pantheon of rock history?
Their legacy is fundamentally rooted in an unbreakable resilience.
Yeah.
Throughout the 1980s, despite their massive commercial success, the media was brutally unfair to Ann. Journalists and executives constantly picked at her weight, utilizing blatant body shaming to try and undermine her immense talent.
It was so common back then, unfortunately.
It was. But the Wilson sisters consistently refused to conform to the industry's sexist expectations. They flat out refused to be reduced to flashy, sexualized, packaged commodities. They focused relentlessly on the sheer power of the music.
And that fierce authenticity, that refusal to play the glossy pop star game, made them absolute icons to the next generation of musicians.
90s generation, right?
Specifically, they became heroes to the 1990s Seattle grunge scene. The Memoir Review points out that a huge number of defining grunge bands cited Hart's heavy, authentic 70s catalog as a massive influence.
That makes total sense.
They essentially became known as the protective godmothers of the entire grunge movement.
They provided a genuine safe harbor for those younger, often troubled musicians in Seattle, and became incredibly close friends with Chris Cornell of Soundgarden and Lane Staley of Alice in Chains.
Two absolute legends who we lost way too soon.
Yes. And the memoir shares this incredibly touching, humanizing anecdote where Jerry Cantrell, the guitarist for Alice in Chains, would frequently sleep over at Ann's house.
I love this story.
When he was too wasted to drive home safely, she would let him crash there, and he would literally sleep wearing Ann's pajamas.
Just picture that. The guitarist for Alice in Chains, this heavy grunge icon, sleeping off a wild night in Ann Wilson's silk pajamas.
It's amazing. They nurtured that scene when it was at its most chaotic.
It's a beautiful image of rock solidarity, and you can see that profound respect they earned from their peers culminating perfectly at the 2012 Kennedy Center Honors.
Oh, what a performance.
Hart was asked to perform Stairway to Heaven as the centerpiece of a massive tribute to Led Zeppelin. And they didn't just play it with a standard backing band. They had a very specific, deeply emotional lineup featuring Shane Fontaine on guitar and a very special guest behind the drum kit.
Yes. The drummer for that performance was Jason Bonham, the son of Zeppelin's late legendary drummer John Bonham.
The emotions in that room must have been so heavy.
The emotional weight of that choice was monumental, and the pressure of the moment itself is hard to overstate.
Yeah.
Hart only had one single rehearsal to nail the arrangement before the live show.
Just one rehearsal for Stairway to Heaven.
Backstage, the environment was incredibly tense. It was freezing cold in the venue, and Nancy was frantically trying to warm up her hands.
Because of that acoustic intro.
Right, she was absolutely terrified of having to play that iconic, delicate, acoustic intro directly in front of Jimmy Page, the man who wrote it.
But they walked out onto that stage with the President of the United States in the audience and the surviving members of Led Zeppelin looking down from the balcony, and they delivered a performance that immediately entered rock history.
It was flawless. It was so deeply moving that it famously brought Robert Plant to tears right there in the balcony.
You can see him crying in the video.
You can. Anne later theorized that part of Plant's overwhelming emotion was looking down at the stage and seeing little Jason Bonham, the kid who used to run around their practice spaces when they were first writing Stairway to Heaven decades ago, now all grown up and flawlessly playing his late father's parts.
And the ultimate undeniable validation came later that night at the celebratory dinner. Jimmy Page walked right up, looked directly at Nancy and told her, "You nailed the guitar part."
Wow.
For a band that spent their early struggling years in Vancouver, constantly being dubbed by critics as just the female Led Zeppelin, having Jimmy Page himself tell you that you nailed his masterpiece has to be the most satisfying full-circle moment imaginable.
Hart's story is the ultimate proof that true artistry and legendary, enduring success can, and often do, emerge from the absolute messiest of human emotions.
Yeah.
They didn't just merely survive the blatant industry sexism, the cruel media scrutiny, and the bitter, painful family fractures. They actively used those trials as fuel. The enduring magic of Hart is found in their ability to keep pushing through the blisters, both literal and metaphorical.
Which brings us to a final thought for you to mull over today as you go about your week. Think back to the origins of Barracuda. We talked about how Hart borrowed that iconic driving guitar riff from the band Nazareth, who had themselves just used it in a heavy cover of a song originally written by the folk legend Joni Mitchell.
The chain of inspiration.
Exactly. It makes you wonder how much of rock history is really just a continuous, endless chain of recycled inspiration. At what point does a stolen, reimagined riff truly become a brand new band's signature sound? Think about that the next time you hear your absolute favorite track and ask yourself whose ghosts might be hiding in the rhythm. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the incredible, resilient legacy of Hart.
Thanks for listening. We'll catch you next time.